Peace be upon you, Professor.
Welcome, Anis.
You sent for me, Professor? What's up?
Anis, you are accused of cheating on your lab reports by copying from your colleague Shamshan.
Me?
Yes, don't deny. All the evidence implicates you. 98.8% cheating.
How is that possible, Professor?
I compared both your reports, and his numbers are the same as yours except for a few differences. Why, son? Why? The request was to take the number from the device and multiply it by its reverse to get the result. Why cheat?
Wait, Professor. Before you accuse me of cheating, show me where I cheated and how you determined the 98.8% cheating percentage.
Come, have a seat. Take this example from the two reports.
Where is the cheating in these figures, Professor?
All this similarity and you still don't see where you cheated?
Well, let's review them line by line to see where I cheated.
These numbers are complicated, and it is not easy to identify the cheating in them.
Professor?
Be quiet. Let's ignore these numbers and cross them out. Look, this number is 58, and since you cheated, we can consider the number 5858 the same as 58. Just repeated.
Professor, how did I cheat here? I multiplied my number by its reverse. The result is correct and completely different from Shamshan's result. If I had copied from him and made a mistake while copying, the result would not have been different from his. And what's more, correct. Don't you see, Professor?
It is a coincidence.
How can it be a coincidence?
Indeed, it is a coincidence, you cheater. Nonetheless, I will not wrong you. To be fair, let's cross out this line as well. Check out this 992. Look.
Okay, how is it related to 2262?
Since you cheated, we can consider this 92 to be the same number, but in a different line, which, in your rush to copy, you accidentally dropped the 9.
Professor, how did I accidentally copy it? The numbers' positions are different in the two reports. The product of reverse multiplication is correct. If I had cheated, my result wouldn't have been different from his, and what's more, correct?
Coincidence.
Professor, how can it be a coincidence?
I said it is a coincidence. You cheater! Nevertheless, I will not wrong you. I will consider it a neutral point. Let's cross it out. Look here. Since you cheated, 222 can be considered 2,262 as you mistakenly added a 6.
Professor,
quiet! No need to discuss it. I'll consider it another coincidence and cross it out also. Another neutral point. Let's see here. Exactly the same numbers. 25, 25, 75, 75, 125, 125. A perfect match. Obvious cheating.
Professor, these are necessary numbers that we all use for setting our devices. My colleagues and I?
No, you are a cheater. Look, I'll consider that these numbers 105, 101, and 225, 255 are different, even though they're very similar with a difference in only one digit. However, it's okay. I do not like injustice, and I'll give you what you deserve. I've also reviewed all your previous reports, Anis. They were 98.8% identical to Shamshan's reports, so this clearly implicates you. Don't you fear Allah, son? Don't you want to learn? Why cheat? Why this betrayal? It is for your own good, Anis.
Take it easy, Professor. Before you start the broken record of it's for your own good, why and what, how many times did you repeat since you cheated? You crossed out many numbers on the assumption that I cheated. Then when you determined the 98.8%, you concluded that I cheated. Isn't this what is called circular reasoning?
Circular what?
Circular reasoning, which means that the evidence and the result are the same. Since I cheated, as you claim, you concluded that my report and Shamshan's matched 98.8%. And since this percentage is high, then it's evidence that I cheated.
Likewise, the myth disciples concluded that the genomes of humans and chimpanzees match by 98.8%. This is one of their most absurd and widespread jokes. It's an interesting story from the pseudoscience factory, so stay tuned. How did they arrive at 98.8%? Since the human and chimpanzee evolved from a common ancestor, then we can compare their genome in ways that assume a common origin. With some fabrication, the homology between them becomes 98.8%. and as this percentage is high, then they must have evolved from a common origin. This means that the evidence is based on the claim. This is what's called circular reasoning. Let's follow their 5 steps to accomplish this. First, omitting a large part of the genetic material where no homology exists between humans and chimpanzees. Second, utilizing software that assumes the validity of evolution. Third, interpreting results assuming the validity of evolution. Fourth, choosing only one type of differences in genetic material while ignoring the rest. Fifth, ignoring research outcomes that are different from the desired percentage. The first 3 steps are performed in laboratories, while the last 2 are propagated in the media. First, we will clarify a matter related to the second step, then proceed step by step. Please keep in mind that the word genome means the genetic material of an organism. In the book Bioinformatics and Functional Genomics, 3rd edition, 2015, which is internationally accredited in the field of genetics and taught at universities, you will find at the start of Chapter 3 a definition of homology as follows. 2 genes, or proteins, are homologous if they have evolved from a common ancestor. The software used for genetic material comparisons depends in some form upon the evolutionary insights of the Dayhoff model. Without this assumption, it is doubtful that the claimed homology percentage would have been reached. Most database search methods used in genetic material comparisons such as BLAST and HMMER rely on this assumption. So, they said, human and chimpanzee genomes are homologous if we consider that they evolved from a common origin, which the myth media propaganda twisted to become human and chimpanzee genomes are homologous, so they must have evolved from a common origin. As usual, the magic wand of the myth disciples changed, if to so. Let's enter the myth production kitchen to see the steps of the production process. We will start with one of their most well-known studies published in 2002 in the American Journal of Human Genetics. How was this study conducted? A sequence was taken from the chimpanzee genome, with 3 million nitrogenous base pairs. To simplify, we will refer to each pair as a letter. So they took 3 million letters from about 3 billion letters. 3 gigabase pairs, which is the number of letters in the entire chimpanzee genome. They basically took about 0.001 of the chimpanzee's genome and compared it to the human genome. Step 1. They excluded part of this sample where no homology existed. Researchers noticed that around 2/3 of the sample was similar to the human genome, so the remaining 28% of the sequence was excluded from the analysis, as it was difficult to compare with human DNA. They excluded another 7%. Why? Because no region with similarity could be detected. This means that they excluded a total of 35% of the 0.001 of the chimpanzee sample they selected. Imagine, dear viewers, 35% was different and thus crossed out beforehand, and still the myth disciples claim 99% homology. Recall how the professor crossed out large parts from the 2 reports before comparing them. The same methodology exactly. Step 2. They compared the remainder of the chimpanzee sample to that of humans. How? Using software that assumes the validity of evolution and that humans and chimpanzees share a common origin. Some people, when they hear, there is similarity to a certain degree between human and chimpanzee genomes, take that to mean that all genes in a chimpanzee were directly compared to all genes in a human, one by one, i.e., compared the hemoglobin-producing gene in a human to that in a chimpanzee, the digestive enzyme-producing gene to its corresponding one in chimps, and so on. This is not the case. Instead, they fragmented the genetic material in humans and chimps and compared them using matrices based on mathematical equations. These matrices and equations assume the validity of evolution, as we've shown in the bioinformatics book. For example, the research we are discussing compared genetic material using the BLAT software, a program similar to BLAST that assumes the validity of evolution, as mentioned in bioinformatics. The comparison is not direct. It includes some complicated details that are explained in the book, as well as in the original studies upon which these programs are based. The details include their assumption about the validity of evolution. Step 3. Once the software results are out, they are interpreted assuming the validity of evolution. In other words, Fragments of the chimpanzee genome appear to be different from the human genome. Yet, the difference is explained from an evolutionary standpoint. For example, these two chains of letters are different from each other. They have nothing to do with each other. However, evolutionists might say, no, but the reality is that they came from a common ancestor who passed down the chain in its original sequence to the chimp. But in humans, two letters inserted themselves, by mistake, through a random mutation in the position of the red arrow. We'll name this intrusion an insertion. Just like the professor who accused Anis of copying the number 222 from his colleague and adding a 6 by mistake to get the number 2262. But wait, even if you assume this, the chains will still have differences in other letters. T is not a C, and G is not an A. They'll reply, as they evolved from a common origin, these two letters must have changed for humans via a substitution process that transformed T to C and another substitution that transformed G to A. Just like the professor's comparison of the number 105 with 101 and 225 with 255 in Anis and Shamshan's reports, a one-digit difference between the two numbers. On what basis did you assume that this actually happened? What gives you the right to come up with this scenario? They'll answer, it is because they evolved from a common origin. But wait, if this really happened, these random processes would have corrupted the function of this segment of the human genome. There is current consensus that long DNA chains are not junk. Contrary to what the myth disciples used to promote before the ENCODE project, results came out in 2012. Distortions in the genetic material usually corrupt its functionality. For example, if the two chains that we compared were two different genes, in humans and chimpanzees, then each would have produced a different but correct protein, with a distinct and different functionality, just like the products calculated by our friend Anis were correct, yet different from Shamshan's.
Professor, how did I cheat? I multiplied my number by its reverse, and the product is correct, completely different from Shamshan's result. If I had copied from him and made a mistake while copying the result, wouldn't have been different from his. And, what's more, correct?
They'd answer, it is a coincidence. A coincidence. Using the same method, researchers compared other segments of the human and chimpanzee genomes and interpreted the differences in various ways that always assume a common ancestor. An exact analogy to the professor basing his explanations on the assumption that Anis cheated from Shamshan. They might say, one base pair or more was dropped in the descent from the common ancestor, a process they call deletion as opposed to insertion. Again, just like the professor believed that 92 is the result of copying 992 and mistakenly dropping the 9. Even when these base pairs' positions were different on the chromosomes, just like the numbers' positions were different in the two reports. Other times they'd explain the difference as a repetition of some letters, a process they call duplication, just like the professor considered 5,858 a result of copying 58 twice. Following this process, the study concluded that thousands of random substitution mutations took place, as well as thousands of random insertion-deletion mutations. These so-called insertion and deletion mutations range in size from 1 to 65 letters. Just imagine, dear viewer, the absurdity of the belief that 65 letters mistakenly intruded in the sequence without impairing the function of this sabotaged sequence. Here, at this third step in the myth's kitchen, the role of laboratory research comes to an end, and media propaganda takes over. Dear viewers, note that scientific research like that we just discussed did not set out to prove evolution through the homology ratio, but started with the assumption of the validity of evolution. They are conscious of that, and of the fact that they're using software that assumes this. Their research was on the types of mutations that they claimed happened to differentiate humans from chimpanzees. Their research question was not, did evolution occur or not? Instead, it was, how did evolution occur? In other words, how did humans and chimpanzees evolve from a common origin? Our problem with such research is with this false initial assumption of the validity of evolution, which we continue, scientifically, to demonstrate its invalidity. As for the myth propagandists, their problem is that they distorted the research, turned assumptions into results, and conveyed the false message that, without any assumptions, the difference between humans and chimpanzees is 1.2%, which proves that evolution is true. Let's see how the propagandists accomplished that, then move on to the fourth step in the myth's kitchen. The propagandists presented the research results as follows. What is the percentage of so-called substitutional differences that resulted in the differentiation between humans and chimpanzees, relative to the chimpanzee genome sample, after excluding a large part of it? The percentage is 1.24%. Well, what about the alleged insertion and deletion differences? The propagandists simply ignored these differences, because had they included them, they wouldn't have arrived at the sensational 98.8%. So, they simply excluded them and highlighted only the percentage of claimed substitution differences. Much the same way the professor excluded all kinds of differences between Anis's and Shamshan's reports and counted only the apparent substitutions. What is the percentage of substitution differences in the study? 1.2%. Aha, 1.2% difference. 100% minus 1.2% equals 98.8% similarity. Accordingly, human and chimpanzee genomes are 98.8% similar. Thus, the myth was thoroughly cooked, ready to be served on pseudoscience tables with a bon appetit to those who allow others to think for them. 35% of the sample was crossed out from the start. Large differences, which they claimed to be the result of insertions and deletions, were ignored. Then a dramatic number was selected to appear in the results to fool superficial people. 1.2%. This is how the 98.8% myth was manufactured. Note how they present it in tenths, 98.8%, and how they don't round to the nearest whole number in a display of false piety. So you appreciate the scientific accuracy in this solid and sacred number as they claim. The real number, however, is not 99, 98, 90, or 80%. Memorize this 5-ingredient recipe, dear viewers, because it is used to prepare many genetic meals in the myth's kitchen. For example, years after our study in 2005, Nature published the most well-known study on the comparison between human and chimpanzee genomes. Let's use it to apply our 5-ingredient recipe, step by step. The first step, crossing out a large part of the genetic material where there is no similarity between humans and chimpanzees. The human genome is estimated to contain 3 to 3.6 billion letters, approximately. Researchers simply crossed out hundreds of millions of letters from the human genome in this analysis and compared only 2.4 billion letters to the chimpanzees. Why only that portion? Because it shows the best alignment. Thus, between 1/5 and 1/3 of each of the human and chimpanzee genomes were excluded from the start because they did not show any similarity. Consequently, the similarity percentage calculated at the end cannot even reach 90%. The second step, using software that assumes the validity of evolution. Indeed, they used BLAST-Z and BLAT that assume the validity of evolution. The third step is to interpret the results based on evolution. Researchers explained the differences between the chimpanzee and human genomes in the same way the professor did with Anis and Shamshan's reports: substitution, insertion, deletion, duplication, and so on. What is the percentage of the so-called substituted letters? 1.23%. And what is the claimed percentage of deleted inserted letters? 3%. Before we proceed, this 3% of this massive genetic material means 5 million insertion-deletion processes with up to 65 letters each, as we saw in the previous study. So you claim that millions of random mutations occurred in this manner, yet still produced a human and a chimpanzee, both perfectly and harmoniously designed. They'll answer, yes, it is a coincidence. What coincidence makes millions of changes in specific positions of the genetic material without corrupting sensitive segments in the remaining positions, when we know that a single change may sometimes be so fatal that neither chimp nor human could even form? Yet they repeat, it's a coincidence. Don't you know the phrase, what an amazing coincidence? Anyway, let us get back to their percentages. 1.23% substitution differences and 3% insertion-deletion differences. As the researchers put it, this 3% difference dwarfs the 1.23% difference. In other words, substitution is dwarfed by insertion-deletion. Now it's the turn of the propaganda machine in the production line of the myth's kitchen. So let's proceed together to the fourth step, choosing one type of difference and ignoring the rest. Thus, large numbers are ignored and dwarf numbers are emphasized. Propagandists simply, but not innocently, ignored the 3% that resulted from insertions, deletions, as well as other mutations, and mentioned only substitutions. They deliberately overlooked the most important aspect of all, which is that 1/5 to 1/3 of the genetic material is excluded from the first step, and that the software assumes the validity of evolution in the second step. Once again, 100% minus 1.2% equals 98.8%. There you have it. The exciting number is proven with no room for doubt. Another appetizing meal for those who allow others to think for them. On the ProMyth channel, Minute Earth, you'll find a video titled, "Are We Really 99% Chimp?" This video explains some of what took place, specifically the trimming of areas with large differences between the human and chimp genomes, which was the first step in our 5-ingredient recipe. Let us watch a section of this video.
The researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Thus, researchers simply excluded large mismatches and omitted large sections of the chimp and human genetic material and compared the rest. Some research conducted by myth disciples determined that there was no justification to ignore one type of difference and consider another, and concludes that the percent difference should be 4%, not 1%. Now comes the 5th step in myth construction, which is the art of overlooking, mastered by myth propagandists to maintain the 99% action number, so it ignores studies which show otherwise. Another analysis which concludes a homology percentage of 95% is ignored by myth propagandists in order to keep alive the exciting action number, 99%. Another more recent study presents a difference of 23%, which means that the similarity is 77%, not 98 or 99%. This is also ignored by myth propagandists for the sake of the action number, 99%. In 2013, a newer and more recent study, where the researchers didn't exclude sections with mismatches, produced a match percentage of, at most, 70%, as the researchers state, while the percentage may be lower. Again, this is ignored by myth propagandists for the sake of the action number, 99%. 99% is near and dear to the myth disciples' hearts, as they also say. The percentage of scientists supporting evolution is about 99%. Allah willing, we will discuss this joke later. Incidentally, it is the same percent of votes Arab presidents get in their national elections, the same percentage and the same level of credibility. Do not be surprised by the large variation in percentages, as the methodology in each is different. Difference in sample selection, trimming, crossing out, how the software used to compare the human and chimpanzee genetic material is designed. The comparison is not easy, straightforward, or free from manipulation and assumptions as the myth propagandists pretend. Of course, if you confront the myth disciples with any of this and ask them what gives you the right to assume the validity of the myth, come up with percentages, and base the validity of the myth on these same percentages, you will get the usual answer, because the similarity in genetic material is not the only evidence. We have so much evidence from different sources, such as fossils and so on. Okay, let's discuss fossils. Again, why do you explain fossils assuming the validity of evolution? Isn't this a form of circular reasoning? They'll say, no, we have evidence for evolution from the 98.8% similarity between human and chimpanzee genetic material. A myth with neither head nor tail.
Isn't this the definition of circular reasoning?
Circular what, dear?
Circular reasoning.
Neither circular nor square. Actually, it is not only the 98.8% that proved to me that you've cheated. I have other evidence.
What is this evidence, Professor?
Ample evidence. Success Vitamins in Tomatoes from the Netherlands. The reason behind its success. The pedal in the car with no function. The reptile's transformation into a bird. Riyadh who stole the million. And the similarity in the shape between your report and Shamshon's. I actually gave your cheating a name. The Shamshonese theory. Case closed. I am now in the process of gathering more evidence for this fact.
Another question. Since the issue, to you, seems to be about action numbers without regard to the details, is the chimpanzee the only animal with a 99% homology with humans according to your methodology? Oh, myth disciples? No. According to a research paper in the well-known evolution journal Nature, 99% of genes in one strain of mice have direct counterparts in humans. This number has a different meaning from the previous numbers, but can also be used to impress shallow people. Why don't you promote this number also as evidence for evolution? Is it because persuading people of chronologically close shared origins with mice is harder than persuading them of shared origins with chimpanzees? Is it because this reveals the absurdity of such comparisons? Is it because it shows that your evolutionary trees are worthless? Your trees which are based on morphological and structural similarities, whose comic aspect we discussed last episode. The trees are also based on genetic similarity, which is just as comedic as we've shown in this episode. Is it because it represents another miserable story of numbers that differ, depending on different methodologies for comparison, crossouts, and trimming, so you see 99% in nature? While on the NIH website you'll read that the protein coding regions are 85% identical, but only 50% or less identical in the vast majority of the genome. Nevertheless, evolutionists still display pictures like this. 92% similarity between humans and mice to convince you that the process was gradual, that randomness and blind selection played around over millions of years, such that the more the genetic similarity, the greater the resemblance to humans. And the Natural History Museum in London, in collaboration with the University of Chicago Press, comes up with this book, 99% Ape, How Evolution Adds Up. Another chapter of Science Made to Order. So we find 99% similarity with mice, 92%, or 85% in some parts, and less than 50% in others. There is also a 99% similarity with chimpanzees. Also 96%, 95%, 77%, and 70%. Choose what you like, myth propagandists, and ignore what you don't like. Then come up with conclusions about the validity of evolution and drawings of evolution trees. Thus, science is subjugated to the Darwinian ideology. This is the story of the 99%. Now that you've understood it, dear viewers, you can smile whenever you read a science magazine like Scientific American, which educates the public that we share 99% of our genetic material with chimpanzees. Then smile as you hear Dr. Richard Dawkins say,
Almost all of the human genome and the chimpanzee genome is identical.
Smile when you see him addressing his followers as children, deluding them into thinking that it's simply a matter of a random mutation, which happened by mistake, here or there, that produced the human and separated him from the chimpanzee.
No difference at all between the human and the chimpanzee. Exactly the same, exactly the same. Now we see another difference there. A versus G. Walk along, walk along, walk along. And there are no more differences in that whole row.
Then laugh out loud when you hear the myth godfathers say, molecular genetics and genetics have settled the case and confirmed evolution. Case closed.
Dean, you do not approve of injustice.
Dean, I proved that Anis cheated by 99%.
99%? How? Please explain. May Allah be pleased with you.
His reports and Shamshon's are 99% identical.
Is your name Anis? Get out. Hurry up. Go away. Come, Professor. Let's talk a little bit.
Anis, I heard you cheated and copied from Shamshon 99%. What a shame. 99%. 99%. What a shame.
"99% of the chimpanzee genome matches the human genome. About 99%. It is absolutely the closest to us. Amazing. This has undoubtedly caused humans tremendous pain.
We found out that they are really identical by up to, at least relatively to primates, more than 94 to 95%, and some of them reach a 99% match.
Dear viewers, we discussed in this episode the fallacy of circular reasoning, which is frequently used by evolutionists regarding genetic material and other things. We also saw what goes on in the myth's kitchen. A large segment of the genetic material is crossed out. Then software built upon the validity of the theory of evolution is used. Then the results are interpreted on the basis of evolution. Then a figure showing one of the differences is used to generate the action number, while larger differences are ignored. Afterwards, other studies with completely different outcomes than the desired one are ignored. Then the same process is repeated with other creatures like mice. Then certain numbers that serve the alleged gradualism story are selected to claim that these numbers indicate the shared origin. 8 steps. Darknesses, some of them upon others. But the 9th and most important step remains. Dear viewer, you might think that I desire, with this episode, to minimize the similarity between human and chimpanzee genomes. But this is incorrect. All I want to show is that we are dealing with liars, and that this 99% is media propaganda that some regurgitate out of ignorance or willful lies. Knowing all this, it doesn't matter to us if the percentage of similarity in the genetic material is 70%, 99%, 99.9%, or even 100%. Because similarity is expected and has been explained, and no matter how big it is. It never affects our observation of Allah's greatness in His creation. Rather, whenever we see similarity in measured proportion and difference in measured proportion, we remain ever reverent, praiseful, and submissive to the One who says, what is translated as, indeed, we have created everything in due measure. How? We will discuss this next episode when see another chapter of the greatness in creation and the comedy of evolutionists, not only in fabricating numbers but also in their interpretation. This is their 9th process in the myth factory. Stay tuned. Peace be upon you.